Last week, I went to the Lincoln Museum and Library in Springfield, Illinois. Not only that, this was actually a historical hat trick. I went to the museum. I went to the Lincoln home, which is a couple blocks away, 3 or 4 blocks away, I guess, the home where Abraham Lincoln and his wife and his children lived from 1844 to 1861 when he went to Washington. And then went to the Lincoln tomb and monument outside Springfield. This was a wonderful day doing this, and I got a special tour of the museum because I was with a member of Congress who had arranged this thing. The museum, if you haven't been to it, it's got a lot of great things there. It's got a lot of stuff that could have been produced by Disney that's designed to attract young people. Now, I guess we're going to find out if it does. I mean, 13-year-olds, and get them interested in history and Lincoln. If it does, fine. And there were a lot of them there when I was there. It was on Columbus Day, and we'll see whether a lot of special effects. They did appeal to me, but whether they'll appeal to 13-year-olds, I don't know. The best part was when I went to the vault. And they opened the vault, and I guess he's the curator of the museum, or he's the Illinois State historian, Tom Schwartz, got out some things for us to see. One of them was one of the 5 copies written by Lincoln of the Gettysburg Address. Now, I forget where the other 3 are. I think one's in the Library of Congress and so on, but it was pretty neat to see it. Then he brought out a piece of cloth from a dress, and this is purported to be the dress worn by the actress who was starring in The American Cousin or An American Cousin, whatever the play was at the Ford's Theater when Lincoln was assassinated. And she obviously came over to where, either up to where he was shot or afterwards, across the street, and got blood on her dress, which she said was Lincoln's blood. A year later, she comes to Springfield, Illinois, and donates the dress. Now, all they had was a little block. I don't know what happened to the rest of the dress, but a remarkable relic. The even more interesting, or not as interesting, was the Lincoln Monument, which was one of the first monuments that was built, something like 1876. And it's one where counterfeiters tried to steal the body of Lincoln sometime in the late 19th century because the head of their counterfeiting ring was in jail, and they thought if they could get the body, and we'll return the body if you let our guy out of jail. And anyway, they were captured. He didn't get out of jail, and now they have, I was told anyway, the tomb is under 10 feet of concrete. It'd be a little hard to steal it, that's for sure. I had one question for the curator at the museum. I had a number of questions, but when you think back, when I read about what I think was one of the most extraordinary events in American history, and that was the I guess 20 days after Lincoln was assassinated. In 12 days of those, Lincoln, the casket, Lincoln's casket, was taken by train all around the eastern U.S., up to New York and Boston, I guess across New York and the Middle West. It took 12 days to get to Springfield. And at each one of these places, the casket was open. Now think about that. Well, I had kind of thought about that. We're all thinking the same thing. So I asked the curator at the Lincoln Museum, what about the body? I mean, doesn't it deteriorate terribly during that time? And he said, no, they had he said, yes, sort of, but they had a mortician on the train. Every place they would stop, they would have already lined up a mortician to come and do what he had to with the body. And so by the time they got to Springfield, it was still an open casket, and there they had to, the body had gotten a little dark, and they did some things, but just amazing. And then the amazing thing was, I remember the Kennedy assassination, and that was an ordeal for a number of days. But this was nearly 3 weeks, and hundreds of thousands of people would show up. Day and night. It was in New York for a couple days, I think, and who was explaining to me today about in Philadelphia, which had a population of about 500,000, it's here for a couple days, and 100,000 or more people came. Isn't that amazing? It was such a remarkable event, and it's in that period, of course, Lincoln became an icon. You read Reveille in Washington, you find out Washington was filled with a lot of people who didn't like Lincoln, many of whom were spies. But all of a sudden he became an icon. And I thought for a long time Lincoln was America's greatest president. He did the most at the worst possible time for America, the Civil War. I know George Washington comes out ahead in most of these polls, and Lincoln's number 2. I'm afraid Washington gets a credit for being a great general, and was a pretty good president too. But Lincoln did it all when he was the president, and what he did, nobody else could have done, and yet he did it. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Lincoln's legacy, at least what I think it is, what I think it's important about it. And since I'm not going to be around tomorrow, the scholars will be free to unravel all the flaws in in the things that I think are important from someone who's not a scholar now. I'm just a guy in journalism. That's not scholarship. It's not inaccurate, but it's we try to the conceit in journalism is that we're there at the front row in history, and we're writing the first draft of history. And when it comes to Lincoln, I prefer the later drafts actually. But anyway, 5 things that to me are important parts of Lincoln's legacy. You could go on and on and on all night about Lincoln's legacy and the things he did or didn't do and that have affected America in so many ways, and I could do that, but I'm not going to. 5 things. The most important one, of course, is he saved the Union and freed the slaves, and I say that knowing that hundreds of thousands of slaves freed themselves. They didn't wait for Lincoln or the Civil War to end. And this is the single greatest presidential achievement in American history. I don't think there's anything close to that. This was the greatest crisis in American history, and Lincoln navigated it, and we wound up achieving things that he hadn't even imagined when the Civil War started, such as freeing the slaves. An incredible. The stakes were never higher, and Lincoln rose to the occasion. When you think in America, we've been an independent country for 208 years. Is that? No, 200 and it's more than that, obviously, because 1976 was 200. 232 years, if my math is getting better. And there was never a time when America was in such peril as it was then. And he guided America at great cost through this, and preserved the Constitution, and really did produce a new birth of freedom. It's just hard to top that. Now, I've written about presidents. That's number 1. Number 2 is Lincoln was the model, ideal president. I've written about a lot of presidents, going back to Gerald Ford. When you talk about, particularly the young people, when you mention President Gerald Ford, you could be talking about William Henry Harrison, for all they remember. And but Gerald Ford was a nice man. I saw a portrait of him today down at the Union League in Philadelphia. Actually, a very nice portrait. But Lincoln was just sort of perfect for the job. He was firm but kind, and strong but merciful. And if you've read the book Team of Rivals, which is a pretty good book, which seems to sort of exaggerate the team quality of the people that were in Lincoln's cabinet, but it was a very good read anyway. But Lincoln didn't hire lackeys. He didn't hire yes men. He didn't hire people that would just follow him. He brought into his cabinet some very strong-willed people who had been very critical of him. William Seward, his Secretary of State, and Edwin Stanton was after a few months became his Secretary of War. Solomon Chase, who actually was very disloyal to Lincoln, but was his Treasury Secretary, and he got the most out of him. Really amazing that he got the best of what these people could offer. These were very talented people. I was reading an essay, I believe, in the New Republic by Sean Wilentz at Princeton about who quoted somebody as calling the cabinet something like the most dysfunctional cabinet in American history. Well, it worked. And anyway.